Rain traced jittery lines down my apartment window as I stared at my phone. The call had ended 2 minutes ago, but the echo of Melis's voice lingered like a scent I didn't want to recognize. Thanksgiving dinner. Just us. We thought it'd be nice, Elowen. She'd said it with the kind of syrupy tone that didn't belong to her, not naturally. Not the Melis I grew up with, the one who corrected my posture at dinner by nudging my ribs under the table, or who once told me, "We're not here to accommodate your moods, sweetheart." What stood out wasn't the invitation. It was how often she said Callista's name. Every sentence was peppered with it. Callista's excited. Callista's fiancé will be there. Callista says it won't be the same without you. I hadn't seen my stepsister in almost a year, and yet suddenly, my presence was essential. My instincts bristled, but I told her I'd come. For Dad, I told myself, not for them. The truth was, I hadn't been back for Thanksgiving in 5 years, not since the year they served dessert before telling me they'd refinance the house using my name. I remember Dad saying, "You make good money, it's not a big deal, Elowen." I hadn't corrected him then. I didn't storm out or raise my voice. I just cleaned the dishes and left before the coffee was poured. But this time felt different, too polished, too practiced. I stood from the couch, pacing to the kitchen. The faucet dripped like a second clock ticking away my hesitation. Bellevue was only an hour from Seattle, but emotionally, it felt like crossing a canyon with no bridge. I pulled out my suitcase. If I was going back to the Wolf's Den, I might as well pack armor. I chose a plain navy dress, nothing flashy, neutral makeup, low heels. Just enough to look put together, but not enough to be accused of trying to outshine Callista. I added a bottle of Pinot I'd been saving, not because I thought they'd appreciate it, but because I knew they'd judge if I brought nothing. While checking my email, a new message popped up from Melis. "Don't forget something homemade. Callista loves your stuffing." I stared at the smiley face. The passive aggression of the emoji made my stomach turn. She never used emojis, ever. I'd gotten emails from her with subject lines like, "Urgent, your father's appointment, and please respond ASAP," for years. But now she was sending smiley faces? Dahlia called just as I was digging through my spice rack. "You're going?" she asked. She didn't need to clarify where. I hadn't told her I was invited, but somehow she knew. "It's just dinner," I lied, stirring breadcrumbs into the mix. "Besides, it's been a while." "Elowen," she sighed. "They don't change. They just get better at wearing masks." I almost said she was wrong, but my throat wouldn't cooperate. The next afternoon, I drove through traffic and rain to Bellevue. Every mile closer, my grip on the wheel tightened. When I pulled into their driveway, the house looked like a magazine spread. Pumpkins lined the path, fairy lights glittered in the windows, and a perfectly symmetrical wreath hung on the door. It was the kind of display that screamed curated, not lived in. I barely had time to knock before the door opened. "There you are," Melis said, not a hint of warmth in her voice. "The turkey won't cook itself." No hello, no hug. She turned on her heel and disappeared down the hallway. I carried in my bag and the wine bottle myself. No one offered to help. Inside, the scent of cinnamon and clove was overpowering, fake, like one of those plug-in scents that clung to the air like perfume from a department store flyer. Melis was reclining on a massage chair in the living room, sipping something out of a wine glass, her feet propped up. The chair hummed softly as she pointed lazily toward the kitchen. "Fridge is stocked. I started a list. Dishes on the counter need prepping. And leave the stuffing alone. Callista's sensitive to salt this week." My suitcase was still at the doorway. I left it there. Callista wasn't around. Of course she wasn't, but her presence was overwhelming. Framed photos of her in pageant sashes, graduation robes, ski vacations. Not one of me. Not even the group photo from Dad's retirement party where I'd paid for the catering and they cropped me out for the Facebook post. Dad shuffled in 20 minutes later, gave me a quick side hug and mumbled, "Thanks for coming, kid." Then he went to adjust the stereo volume. The next hour, I was handed a chore list. Cooking, chilling wine, setting the table, polishing silver. Melis claimed her back was acting up and gestured again to the massage chair like it was a prescription from a doctor. I sliced, stirred, and simmered alone while laughter drifted from the other room. Occasionally, someone passed by to grab a drink, not bothering to look at me. I was the help, and I was dressed too nice for it. I walked upstairs, curiosity leading me. My old room had become Callista's dressing lounge. Makeup kits, costume jewelry, garment racks. On the vanity sat a music box, mine. A chipped porcelain dancer twirled under a cracked mirror. My chest tightened. Age 12 came back like a punch. That year, I'd been asked to serve plates to the guests while Callista performed a Taylor Swift song in the living room. She forgot the lyrics halfway through. Everyone applauded anyway. I returned downstairs, hands trembling as I diced onions. My reflection in the knife looked distant, not broken, not sad, just not me. I pulled out my phone and typed a message to Dahlia. You were right, should have stayed home. The dining room had been set for 12. When I brought out the plates, Malis tapped the end closest to the kitchen. You'll sit here, she said. Easy to jump up and grab things if we need. The chair was next to the swinging trash bin, right by the utility cart. The only seat without a cushion. I looked around. Callista's place card was in gold. Mine was written in blue ink. I didn't say a word. Some invitations are traps dressed as tradition. You're early. That's all Malis said when she opened the door. No smile, no hug, not even the performative warmth she'd faked on the phone a few days ago. Just that flat remark, followed by a half-second of eye contact and a nod toward the hallway. She turned before I could answer. I stepped into the foyer, wiping my feet carefully on the mat. The scent of nutmeg and synthetic cinnamon hung heavy in the air, stronger than last time. I paused briefly, scanning the living room. Every pillow fluffed, every candle lit. It looked staged, not lived in, more like a magazine shoot than a family home. Dad was in the backyard, crouched beside the fire pit with a lighter in one hand, fiddling with damp wood. When I waved, he gave me a thumbs up without looking my way. Callista wasn't there yet. No surprise. She always arrived just in time to make an entrance. I was used to it, being early, being invisible. I set down my bag near the kitchen and was about to ask if she needed help with anything when Malis handed me a floral-printed stack of place cards and said, You know where everything is. No, thank you. No, can you help me with this? Just delegation. I didn't respond. I took the cards and started laying them out one by one, letting my fingers move on autopilot. Forks, knives, spoons, napkins folded, plates aligned, name tags placed. Gold script gleamed from every name card, except mine. Mine was written in pen. The ink had smudged slightly, like someone scribbled it in a rush. My spot was tucked next to the kitchen door, right beside the trash bin. No cushion on the chair, just a hard wooden seat facing away from the center of the table. I held the card in my hand for a moment, then gently set it down. Is this really where you want me? I asked, keeping my tone light. Milas, without looking up from her wine glass, replied, Well, you're the quickest to get up when someone needs something. I swallowed the reply that bubbled up. My jaw tensed, but I let it slide. I reminded myself, I chose to be here. I said yes. But as I turned to align the water glasses, a quiet voice in my mind whispered, You're not a guest. You're the help. With the table set, I wandered the hallway while waiting for guests to arrive. The hallway wall had always held family photos, but now it was a curated timeline of Callista's greatest hits. Her prom dress, her college graduation, the ribbon cutting at her spa, her recent engagement party at the lake house. In every picture, she was radiant. Malis always by her side, Dad smiling like a proud senator. I scanned for myself. Nothing, not even in the background. Then I found one, Thanksgiving. 10 years ago. I remembered it vividly. I'd taken time off from work, spent hours prepping food, driven across town with 2 pies I baked myself. I leaned in closer. They had cropped me out. You could see a sliver of my sleeve just at the edge of the frame, next to the table. But my face, my body, gone. Callista was centered, holding a wine glass and smiling wide, Malis standing behind her like a proud manager. It wasn't that they forgot me. They removed me. I stepped back, heart quiet but pounding in my chest. Voices swelled from the front door. Guests began to arrive. Coats rustled, laughter echoed, air filled with compliments. Malis turned into the perfect hostess, gliding from person to person, kissing cheeks and accepting wine bottles with gracious nods. When Callista entered 20 minutes later, the energy in the room shifted like a stage light snapping on. Applause. Literal applause. Someone whistled. She wore a cream blouse with pearl buttons and a floor-length skirt like she was walking into a gala. I stood there holding a bottle of Pinot, and just as I moved to place it on the counter, a woman I didn't recognize glanced at me and asked, "Oh, are you the caterer?" My breath caught. For a moment I debated correcting her. Before I could respond, Malis chuckled. "She's family. Just very helpful." Helpful. I smiled tightly. "Yep, that's me." Dad stepped in from the patio, clapped Callista on the back and said, "We're just glad she's home for the holidays. The place feels brighter when she's around." I nodded and murmured, "So am I." The words turned to ash before they left my tongue. I moved to the side of the room, invisible again. People swarmed Callista, asking about her spa expansion, her wedding colors, her dress fittings. Every time I passed by a group, they shifted slightly, as if my presence tilted the room off balance. Dinner was announced at 6:30. Malis rang a glass and said, "Everyone to the table," with the same tone a teacher uses at recess. People moved to their seats with wine glasses in hand and casual conversation hanging midair. I walked toward the table slower than most, and there it was. My chair. Still next to the kitchen door. No one had moved it. The name card still smudged, still written in ink. Callista slid into the center seat, flanked by our parents, like royalty. I hesitated, glanced around, then sat. Not because I belonged there, but because it was the only seat left. The wood didn't hurt. The message did. This table may have been set for 12, but I'd never felt more alone. The hallway cabinet creaked as I pulled it open, dust swirling into the filtered sunlight. I hadn't planned to go snooping, just needed a serving platter. But the familiar shimmer of tarnished silver inside an old jewelry box caught my eye. It was tucked behind a stack of mismatched table linens, the ones we only brought out for performative holidays like this. I paused, heart thudding low in my chest. The box had belonged to my mother. I hadn't seen it in years, assumed it had been lost in one of the family donations Malis was so fond of orchestrating when I was away at college. I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled between tangled chains and a forgotten pin, was the necklace, a slim gold chain with a delicate locket etched with the initials E.H. Eliza Harper, my mother. I hadn't seen it since sophomore year. I searched for it for weeks back then. Asked everyone. Malis, with a perfectly rehearsed tilt of her head, told me maybe I misplaced it during finals. I wanted to believe her. I didn't. And now, here it was, hidden like contraband, shoved behind napkins nobody used. I sank to the floor, cross-legged on the hardwood, the box open in my lap. The memory of coming home during a break and finding the garage filled with cardboard boxes returned in perfect clarity. Malis and Callista were hosting a yard sale. I'd asked about the boxes marked Eloan, and Malis waved them off, said, "You were never coming back for that stuff anyway." At the time, I was too exhausted to argue. Finals, part-time jobs, student loans, I had more urgent fires to put out. But now, with the necklace cool in my hand, that moment twisted inside me. They hadn't just sold things, they sold pieces of me. I closed the box, stood up, and carried it back to the kitchen, placing it quietly under the sink cabinet, not for hiding, just to process later. But as I turned, my eyes caught something else, a pair of heels, champagne suede, soft as butter, resting neatly by the breakfast nook. I knew those shoes. I'd bought them 5 years ago with my first bonus check. They were my small reward after surviving a brutal project and negotiating a raise. I kept them in a dust bag and only wore them once, to a company gala. I never saw them again. The realization hit like a slow, sinking tide. Callista had been wearing things I once owned for years. Accessories, cardigans, even the rose gold watch I thought I lost in my old apartment. She'd show up in photos online, brunches, bridal expos, spa events, and I'd squint, wondering why her style felt so eerily familiar. Because it wasn't just style, it was mine, not stolen in one grand act of betrayal, but piece by piece, memory by memory, until my history had been refitted onto her like a tailored suit, rebranded. Not anger, not yet, but a hollow chill spread across my chest. Not the kind that came from grief, but the clarity that arrives when a lie you've politely accepted finally collapses under its own weight. You don't erase someone by burning their name. You just give their story to someone else. I needed air. I told myself I'd freshen up before dinner, but truthfully, I just needed to be alone. I slipped into the guest bathroom and shut the door. A tablet lay on the counter, still open, screen aglow. Curiosity trumped decency. I picked it up. It was Melis's. Her personal financial dashboard was still logged in. I tapped the screen lightly, scrolling past spa inventory and vendor invoices. Then I saw it. A tab labeled Medical Transfer History. My name appeared 4 times. $800, $1,100, $700, $950. Dates matched months when I'd wired funds to help Dad cover prescriptions and therapy sessions after his fall last year. I remembered them well, those late-night phone calls, Melis's urgent voice, the guilt she so expertly wrapped in, "We're family," and "You know how proud your dad is." I scrolled further. Recent transactions, $3,100 to Lilac Sage Floral Designs, $1,750 to Silverstone Events, a $6,000 deposit to The Meadow Room, a high-end wedding venue Callista once gushed about. My stomach dropped. The screen blurred. They didn't just reroute the money. They'd reallocated my empathy. I almost dropped the tablet. My hands shook. My knees wobbled as I sat down on the edge of the tub. I couldn't hear anything outside the bathroom, but the silence felt like a chorus. My breath came shallow. I blinked down at the screen, then closed the app, set it down, and stared at my reflection. I saw a woman who had gone out of her way to be decent. A woman who worked late nights and skipped vacations to help people who couldn't remember her birthday. They didn't just rob me. They used my compassion as currency. I found Dad outside near the grill, pretending to monitor chicken skewers he clearly forgot to flip. The flames flickered too high, licking at the skewers. "Hey," I said softly. He jumped slightly, then smiled in that way people do when they're not sure why you're there. "I just wanted to ask, the money I sent for your medical stuff, was that used?" He shifted. "What do you mean?" "The funds I wired. For prescriptions. The transfers show up under wedding vendors. Did you know?" He stared at the grill, poked at it half-heartedly. "Money's just numbers, Elowen. What matters is family showing up." A practiced dodge. A coward's script. I nodded slowly. "So, you didn't know?" He didn't answer. Melis stepped out from the back door, holding a wine glass like a trophy. "We thought you'd be proud," she said, all honey and vinegar. "It's your sister's big moment." "You're doing something meaningful." I felt my voice rise in my chest, pressing against my throat. I swallowed it. "Yeah," I whispered. "No good deed goes unpunished." I walked away before I could cry. Back in the bathroom, I locked the door, sat on the edge of the tub again. This time, I cried. Not loudly, not hysterically, just let it happen. Tears fell for the quiet girl who thought if she worked hard enough, gave generously enough, smiled long enough, they'd finally see her. But they did see me. They saw a source. I scrolled through my bank app, transfers going back years, rent paid, car insurance covered, groceries when Mom got laid off, the time Callista borrowed money for a business course. It wasn't the first time, just the first time I let myself look. I wiped my face and stared at the mirror again. The woman staring back wasn't broken. She wasn't even angry. She was done. As I opened the door to rejoin the party, I paused. From the living room, Callista's voice rang out clear. "It's not like Elowen even uses her money. She's always alone. What does she need it for?" The words sliced cleaner than any argument. They didn't just steal my past. They were budgeting out my future. The kitchen smelled like overcooked cranberry sauce and false civility. I stirred gravy on the stovetop, wooden spoon moving in circles that matched the loops of my rehearsed words. I'd been cycling through variations of them all afternoon, somewhere between diplomatic and direct, just enough edge to be heard, but not dismissed. The voices from the living room surged louder, with each glass of wine poured, every clap to Callista's latest update. Dahlia appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with a softness I didn't realize I needed. "Why are you doing this to yourself?" she asked, her voice barely rising above the clatter of silverware. I shrugged, offered a smile more fractured than real. "Because someone has to show up," I said, keeping my eyes on the bubbling pot, even when they're erased. She opened her mouth to say something else, then stopped. Maybe she saw the resolve behind my tired eyes. Maybe she knew this had less to do with belonging and more to do with finally being done pretending I didn't notice. As she disappeared down the hall, I replayed the thoughts I'd kept zipped behind my teeth. If a woman raises her voice at the dinner table, they call her dramatic. If she says nothing, they call her ungrateful later. And when she finally walks away, they ask why she never gave them a chance. Malis clinked her glass. "We have a special surprise before dinner." Her voice carried through the house like a director calling actors to stage. "Callista, sweetheart, come here." I wiped my hands, dried them on a towel, and peeked around the corner. Callista stood by the fireplace, hands clasped together like she was accepting an award. Malis handed her a velvet-wrapped box, her smile so wide it bordered on parody. "This is something Callista made with so much love," Malis beamed. "It's a tribute to how far she's come." Callista unwrapped the box slowly, playing to the audience. But as soon as I saw it, I knew. The etched edges, the slightly off-center hinges. I built that box in high school, for our mother's birthday. "Actually," I said, stepping into the room, "I made that 10 years ago." Every head turned. Callista froze, still holding the lid open. "I was just updating it," she mumbled. Malis's voice sliced in with a chirpy laugh. "Oh, honey, that's not important. What matters is the sentiment." She raised her glass before anyone could respond. "To family and the ways we lift each other." They lifted her. They repackaged me. They don't just steal objects, they rewrite origins. Later, when the crowd thinned and the pre-dinner wine fog mellowed, Dahlia pulled me aside again. We stepped into the mudroom near the back door, where the smell of fresh pine fought against the must of old coats. "Come with me tomorrow," she whispered. "Just you and me. We'll get brunch, something normal." I nodded. Yeah, I think I'd like that." Neither of us noticed Malis standing by the stairs until she cleared her throat. Her voice was sweetened with faux concern. "Elowen, don't let your aunt confuse you. This is your home too. Family doesn't walk away over little things." "Little things?" I said, turning to face her. "Or little lies?" She blinked slowly, but didn't answer. Later that evening, I found out through Dahlia's phone that Malis had called her and politely requested she cancel brunch. "We wouldn't want to fracture the energy," she said. "Let's keep Elowen grounded." Grounded, like a child, like a plant with roots she'd cut herself. Dinner was served just past 6. The table looked like a Pinterest board come to life, perfect centerpieces, folded napkins shaped like leaves, each wine glass polished to a magazine shine. As I sat in my assigned chair, which still hovered near the trash bin, I tried to join the conversation. "So," I started, "I heard the spa's expanding?" 3 people spoke over me. My question drowned in a sea of engagement stories and honeymoon plans. I waited, tried again later. Nothing. A cousin leaned in, smiling politely. "You've always been the quiet one, haven't you? Not like Callista. She's magnetic." "She's more into code than people," Callista added with a playful tone. Dad chuckled. "Well, not everyone has a people person's soul. That's okay." I placed my fork down gently. "I may not be the loudest," I said clearly, "but I'm the only one paying your insurance." The table went still. Malis froze mid-sip. Callista blinked. But within seconds, the silence cracked. Someone coughed. Another laughed too loudly. The conversation picked back up as if I hadn't said a word. That was the moment I understood. The volume didn't matter. They were never listening. After dessert, I asked Dad to step outside for a quick word. The porch light buzzed overhead. He leaned against the railing, arms folded like he already knew where this was going but wasn't ready to hear it. "I think it's time we put some boundaries in place," I said softly. "You don't get to humiliate me and still ask for support." He shook his head slowly, eyes fixed on the lawn. "You're reading too much into everything. Don't make this about you." I breathed in through my nose. "Then let this be the last thing I give this house, my silence." I walked back inside, heart steady for the first time all day. As I passed the hallway on the way back to the dining room, I heard Callista's voice from the den, clear and unfiltered. "She's just bitter. She knows she'll never be the daughter worth celebrating." I stopped mid-step. That wasn't a whisper. That was a belief. My heart didn't break. It didn't even crack. It aligned. I turned without a word, climbed the stairs to the guest room, and opened my bag. The flash drive sat inside a velvet pouch, ready and waiting. Tomorrow, they'd hear my voice, not in a scream, but through undeniable truth. I walked back into the living room with my spine straighter than it had any right to be. The flash drive was now tucked securely into the back pocket of my slacks, and my hands had stopped trembling. I'd spent the last few minutes breathing alone in the guest bathroom, counting tiles, not time. I had no intention of storming out, not yet. I wasn't done watching. Callista sat perched on the edge of the couch, legs crossed like she was posing for a lifestyle magazine. She caught my eye and smiled with that same sugary grin she'd worn since childhood, sweet enough to rot something in your stomach. Dad reached over and patted her shoulder, saying something low I couldn't hear, but it made her giggle. A woman I didn't recognize approached me with a warm smile. "You must be their nanny," she said, gesturing toward Callista and my father with her wine glass. The chuckle that followed wasn't cruel, it was polite, unassuming. The kind of laugh people make when they're certain of the narrative. I smiled back, tightly. "No, just the forgotten daughter," I said. She blinked, confused, but didn't ask further. Being misidentified hurts less than being ignored on purpose. Dinner began just after 7. The table glittered with silver and curated elegance, every napkin folded perfectly, the turkey sliced with surgical precision. Toasts erupted like clockwork. "To family who stands by us," Dad said as he raised his glass. "To Callista, the one who always shows up." Everyone clapped. I watched their hands, some with rings, some bare, all clapping for a story I didn't belong in. I sat with my hands in my lap, not raising my glass, not smiling, just remembering. When I was 8, they forgot my birthday. We'd been visiting Marlis's parents, and somehow all the planning slipped through the cracks. That night, after we got home, Callista had cake. I watched her blow out candles while mine sat unbought in a Safeway freezer. They said I was being dramatic. I cleared my throat to say something, maybe to toast, maybe to reclaim a second of space. But Malis clapped her hands and said, "Let's bring out dessert." If your absence makes no difference, your presence becomes threatening. As we transitioned from turkey to green beans and mashed potatoes, Malis placed a dish directly in front of me. "Try this," she said, tone saccharine. "I made it just the way you used to like it." I knew better, but I forked a bite anyway. The salt hit my tongue like punishment. My throat tightened and I grabbed my water. Malis laughed. "Oh dear," she said loudly enough for the table to hear. "I used your old recipe. Maybe it's not as good as Callista's after all." I pushed the plate aside, my appetite evaporated. From across the table, someone muttered, "Maybe tech girls don't belong in the kitchen anyway." The laughter came like a rolling fog, low, spreading, consuming. That was it. I folded my napkins slowly, deliberately, and stood up. Chairs shifted slightly as heads turned. I placed the napkin on my plate, looked down the table, and smiled, not warmly, but with surgical clarity. "For years," I began, "I thought silence was the highest form of respect. I see now it's just permission." No one moved. "You've taken from me time, money, recognition. You used my support as your safety net, And never once did any of you look me in the eye and say thank you. Not for the mortgage, not for the bills, not even for the way I stepped back so Callista could have the spotlight uninterrupted. Dad opened his mouth. I lifted my hand. You raised Callista like a queen, I continued, voice steady. You raised me like an employee, no paycheck. No praise. An uncle at the far end of the table clapped once, awkwardly, then stopped when no one joined. I turned and walked away. I didn't slam the door, didn't cry, didn't scream. I stepped into the hallway and let the echo of my heels on the carpet mark the line I'd just drawn. Dahlia caught up with me. She placed a hand gently on my shoulder. You did right, she said. I nodded. That wasn't for them, I whispered. That was for me. Back in the guest room, I closed the door and opened my laptop. The screen lit up with a soft glow. I clicked into a folder I'd kept hidden for years, titled simply, Contingency, Blackmore Family. Inside were receipts, transfer confirmations, voicemails. Every time Dad asked for help with utilities, every payment made for car repairs. The flight I booked for Callista when she forgot her card during college, notes from therapy, screenshots of texts, calendar invites for family events I was never copied on. I clicked on a file labeled, What They Never Thanked Me For, PPTX. The first slide read, Built by Elowin, silenced by everyone. Tomorrow, I wasn't going to serve dinner. I was going to serve facts. I woke before the sun. The house was quiet, the kind of stillness that amplifies the sound of your breath and the weight of your thoughts. I slipped out of bed, pulled on a sweater, and tied my hair back into a low knot. It was time. I told Malis I'd go for a walk, clear my head before brunch. She didn't ask questions, too busy powdering her face in the hallway mirror. I stepped outside, walked 1 block, then doubled back through the side entrance and up the stairs. No one noticed. Back in the guest room, I booted up my laptop and checked every file on the USB drive. Again, slides, receipts, screenshots, voice memos, all in place. I clicked open my script and read the first lines under my breath. Not trembling, not timid, just ready. I stood in front of the mirror and practiced. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time, I said softly, quoting Maya Angelou. I took a breath. Today, I won't be erased. I'll be witnessed. Reaching into the lining of my coat, I pulled out the USB, small and smooth like a confession shaped in plastic. Inside it was a recording that had haunted me for months. Malis, during a spa party, drunk, loud, laughing in front of her staff. Of course I blocked her Yale application. Couldn't let Callista look average next to that little genius. The clip was under 2 minutes, but it was enough. It had been sent to me anonymously by a former employee. I never replied, never asked who they were. Some truths don't need witnesses to be real. But now, I needed everyone to hear it. I plugged the USB into my laptop again, just once more. Played the file. Malis's voice, unfiltered and sharp. I smiled, not with revenge, but recognition. They burned my bridges. I built a tunnel. Downstairs, the air changed. The guests gathered again, laughter mixed with the clink of glasses and the warmth of curated lighting. The family tribute was about to begin. Malis stood front and center, holding a microphone like she was about to deliver a wedding toast. I lingered in the back of the room, hand in my coat pocket. Today, Malis began, we honor someone who exemplifies grace, vision, and resilience. My daughter, my Callista. Applause. Callista stood, adjusted her blouse, smiled demurely. I've learned that resilience is inherited, she said, her voice as smooth as a lifestyle commercial. From my mother, who taught me to never rely on anyone but myself, to own every space I walk into, to be a woman of value. My fingers twitched around the USB. A woman of value, no mention of Dad, certainly none of me. And most of all, Callista continued, she taught me that sometimes, when people aren't strong enough to rise, they try to pull others down with them. I'm grateful I had her to show me what rising looks like. More applause. I stepped forward. Calmly, no rush. The room didn't quiet right away, until Dad saw me approaching the TV with a remote in one hand and the USB in the other. Elowin? Malis said, tone clipped. Just a few words, I replied. Dad shrugged. Let her speak. I turned to face them all. Before dessert, I began, let's enjoy something sweet. The truth. I inserted the USB and hit play. The room hushed as the clip began. Melis's voice blared from the speakers, unmistakable, amused. Of course I sabotaged her Yale application. Couldn't let Callista look bad next to that little genius. The silence that followed was heavy. An aunt dropped her wine glass. It shattered, but no one flinched. I looked at Melis. Her face didn't move, neither did Callista's. Funny, I said. How the truth doesn't need applause. It just needs witnesses. Melis stormed out. Dad stood frozen, lips parted but empty. The applause that followed Callista's speech now felt like a fever dream. The reality stood in front of them, undeniable. Callista cried, not quietly but performatively. You ruined this, she sobbed. You ruined my moment. I reclaimed mine, I said, still calm. Some guests avoided my eyes, others looked away entirely, but Dahlia looked straight at me and gave the smallest, firmest nod I'd ever seen. I walked back to my seat, took one long sip of wine. No one dared speak. Later, back in the guest room, I opened a blank email. Subject line, Transfer of ownership, Blackmore House. I attached the documents, deed, financial ledgers, support breakdown, insurance history. My name was on everything, and I had just publicly exposed the one thing they never expected, evidence. I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished. Final line typed. They wanted me out. Tomorrow, they'll find out who's actually leaving. The smell of pancakes greeted me before I reached the kitchen, but it did nothing to soften the tension curled in my stomach. Melis stood at the stove flipping a batch, humming to herself like she hadn't been publicly exposed less than 12 hours ago. Her robe was pristine, hair swept back into a perfect bun, lipstick fresh. Good morning, sunshine, she chirped. Hungry? Dad was hunched at the table, face buried in his phone. He didn't look up. He hadn't since last night's bombshell played over the speakers. Callista hadn't come down yet. I poured myself coffee in silence, keeping my back to both of them. Their effort to resume normalcy was almost comedic. Forced smiles, stiff gestures, like painting over water-damaged drywall and hoping no one noticed the bulge. They saw the cracks, but instead of repairing them, they just painted over. I took a seat, sipped my coffee, and nodded when Melis placed a plate in front of me. No pressure if you're still upset, she added, voice dripping with feigned grace. I'm fine, I lied. Just watching. Mid-morning, Melis clapped her hands and called for everyone's attention. Change of plans, she announced brightly. We've decided to host a little celebration brunch for Callista. A thank you for being the light of our family. I nearly choked on my coffee. Relatives returned. The backyard transformed into a Pinterest board again. Tables draped in gold linens, centerpieces with baby's breath and candles, a printed sign that read, Celebrate her. I scanned the seating chart. My name wasn't on it. Where would you like me? I asked Melis. Oh, you know, she said with a dismissive laugh. You're always moving around anyway. We figured you'd be helping. Callista arrived fashionably late, dressed in a white cocktail dress like a bride who couldn't wait for the actual wedding. She was met with applause, camera flashes, and a mini photo shoot on the patio. I stepped back, cradling a tray of juice glasses, watching as the show played out. They turned reality into performance. She played the star, Melis the director. I was the silent stagehand no one clapped for. During brunch, Callista stood and tapped her glass. I want to share something, she said sweetly. For all of you who've supported me, and especially for Mom, who taught me what love and success really look like. She held up her phone. A live stream. Welcome to my grateful heart brunch, she said to the camera. Growing up in this home full of support, guidance, and unconditional love shaped me into the woman I am. She turned the camera slowly across the yard, catching everyone's smiles and toasts. Then, briefly, it caught me, clearing plates, shoulders slightly hunched, a dish towel tucked into my waistband. A comment popped up. Is that your maid? The hearts and thumbs up flooded in. Callista smiled at the camera. She's part of the story in her own way. I felt my cheeks burn, not from shame, but something colder, clearer. She erased me in public, again. I stepped away from the crowd, walked into the hallway near the garage where Malis was fixing her lipstick in a wall mirror. "You really think this performance will last forever?" I asked. She didn't flinch. "People believe what we show them, Elowen. You had your chance to shine. You didn't know how." "No," I said calmly. "I just didn't beg for the spotlight." She turned to face me, eyes narrowing. "You're playing with fire, showing that recording. You want a lawsuit?" "You can't sue someone for quoting your own truth," I said, holding her gaze. She stepped back. I walked away. I didn't need to yell. I didn't even need to win the argument. I already had what mattered, proof. Back outside, I poured drinks, passed plates, smiled politely. I didn't need to be loud. I just needed to be present. People started looking at me differently, quieter, more cautious. Some avoided eye contact, others offered half-hearted smiles. Dahlia leaned in as she grabbed a scone. "They've built a glass palace," she murmured, "and you're the crack in the foundation." "Then maybe it's time to let it shatter," I replied. As the final toast approached, Callista took the mic again. "I wouldn't be here," she said, "without the woman who shaped me." All heads turned to Malis. Callista walked toward her, then paused, pivoted, and stopped in front of me. "She molded me," Callista said slowly, "into who I am, by showing me everything I'll never be." I sat alone in the guest room, the same four walls that had once been Callista's backup closet, now bearing witness to what would come next. The folder labeled Final glowed faintly on my laptop screen. I didn't need to open it. I had memorized every file, every receipt, every timestamp like scripture. Callista's words still echoed in my ears. She molded me into who I am by showing me everything I'll never be. The irony of her performance wasn't lost on me. The tearful delivery, the pivot to face me, the audience eating it up like it was an off-Broadway tragedy. I knew it was meant to sting, but instead it cemented the fact that this family didn't want truth. They wanted theater. I zipped the backup drive into my coat pocket and plugged in my phone, fully charged. Good. My hands were steady, heart not racing. This wasn't anxiety, it was precision. I let them shape the narrative for too long. Time to take back the pen. Downstairs, laughter and the clinking of glasses announced the beginning of the end. Malis had gathered everyone in the living room, standing by the fireplace with a flute of sparkling cider, as if she were hosting an awards ceremony. "We thought we'd end this weekend with a slideshow," she said, flashing her best camera-ready smile, "to celebrate how far we've come as a family." Callista was seated between both parents, her white dress perfectly lit by the overhead chandelier. Someone dimmed the lights. A hush fell over the room. "I've prepared a surprise too," I said, stepping forward. Malis stiffened. "Now's probably not." "It won't take long," I interrupted, plugging the USB into the TV. I thought we could enjoy a different kind of tribute. There were a few polite chuckles. Someone clapped. They thought this was still part of the show. They handed me the mic. They assumed I'd sing their song. The first slide appeared. What they never thanked me for. The photos were ordinary. Receipts, screenshots of bank transfers, copies of bills paid over the last 8 years, $700 for Dad's car repair, $1,200 to cover Callista's final semester, $9,000 to $600 a year on mortgage payments. Dates and amounts, all tagged with names and purposes. There was no narration. I let the facts speak. The room shifted. Then came the clip. Malis, caught in a candid moment at her spa's holiday party, wine in hand. "Oh, Elowen," she laughed. "Please, of course I blocked her Yale app. Couldn't have Callista look bad next to that little genius. You know how donors love a perfect daughter." A fork clattered onto the floor. The room was so silent, even the air buzzed. I clicked forward to the final slide. "You wanted to be celebrated, Callista," I said. "This is the price of the crown you wore on my back." No applause, just stares. A couple of relatives looked at the floor. Others glanced toward the exits. Melis's grip tightened around her glass. Dad's face turned the shade of ash, and Callista, her smile dropped. Whatever tears she had prepared were replaced with silence. Dad finally spoke. "Where did you get that footage?" "From someone tired of pretending," I said. Melis stood, her voice shrill. "You're just bitter. You always wanted to ruin Callista's happiness." "I never wanted her spotlight," I replied, cool and measured. "Just my own truth to be seen." The moment stretched thin until Melis's hand swiped the coffee table, sending a decorative vase crashing to the floor. "She always destroys things," she shouted, her face red. I didn't flinch. "You're right," I said. "I destroyed your illusion." Callista started crying, loud and unfiltered. "Dad, say something." He didn't. Guests started to murmur. Someone got up and left. Another followed. The celebration had turned into an evacuation. A cousin approached me gently. "I'm sorry." "And I didn't know." "You weren't supposed to," I replied. "That was the point." Dahlia wrapped me in a hug so firm I felt her bones. "You did what I never had the courage to," she whispered. I didn't cry. I just exhaled, a breath that felt 8 years overdue. Back upstairs, I opened my email and clicked send on the draft titled Transfer of Ownership, Blackmore House. Attached were all the legal documents, the property deed in my name, financial records, the lawyer's contact for all further correspondence. This house may look the same tomorrow, but it won't belong to them. As I gathered my things, Melis blocked the hallway. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "We're your family." I stepped aside, brushing past her without a glance. At the doorway, I paused and turned back. "Family protects. Family uplifts," I said. "You were just a contract I didn't read close enough." The door creaked open. The night air was cold but honest, and I didn't look back. Not even once. The morning air in Olympia was brisk, and the silence inside Dahlia's guest room was thicker than any fog. My body ached in strange places, shoulders, jaw, even my fingers felt sore. Tension has a way of burrowing in like that, hiding in joints and tendons until it finally finds room to breathe. I sat up slowly, rubbing my arms, the weight of everything I had detonated the day before still hanging over me. I didn't feel regret. I didn't feel triumphant, either. What I felt was absence. Not grief, but the void that follows a collapse. I padded into the kitchen barefoot, poured myself a cup of coffee from the half-warm pot Dahlia had brewed before slipping out for errands. The steam curled upward, and I leaned into it, letting it sting my face. 43 missed calls, 21 texts, 3 voicemails. The latest one was from Dad. "You went too far." His voice cracked through the speaker. "We need to talk." I didn't save it. Funny, I thought, sipping slowly. I lived under their roof for 20 years. They never heard me until I shouted. Dahlia returned mid-morning, groceries in hand and a faint, nervous energy in her movements. "You okay?" she asked, setting down a bag of oranges. I nodded. "Calmer than I thought I'd be." "Good," she said softly, "because everything exploded." She didn't need to explain. The recording had made its rounds. My email, with all attachments, had reached the extended family overnight. Uncle George apparently called it a necessary exposure. Someone else said it was long overdue. Melis had tried to claim the audio was doctored, according to Dahlia, but the voice was unmistakable, and there were too many witnesses. I checked my inbox. One reply read, "I'm sorry, I didn't know." Another simply said, "Elowen, thank you." That's all I needed. Later, I scrolled through Callista's Instagram. Her most recent post, a shot of her and Melis standing under the Celebrate Her banner, had been flooded with comments. "Is this the sister you stole from?" Imagine building a brand off lies. Some defended her, most didn't. The engagement post was still up, but the likes had frozen. Sponsorship tags had disappeared. Dahlia confirmed over lunch that she'd overheard chatter from town. Callista's spa appointments were down, and at least one local wedding vendor had cut ties. Her curated image cracked, just enough to see the scaffolding behind it. I didn't feel joy, just acknowledgement. This was never about revenge, just restoration. She wore my crown and called it her inheritance. By evening, a knock came at the door. I knew before I opened it. Dad stood on the porch, hands shoved into the pockets of an old windbreaker, shoulders hunched not from weather, but weariness. "I'd like to speak with her," he told Dahlia. She hesitated, but I nodded from behind her. "It's okay." We sat in the living room. He chose the edge of the couch. I stayed in the armchair, spine straight. "I didn't know everything," he said, voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "But you knew enough," I replied. He winced. "You embarrassed us." I tilted my head. "You embarrassed yourself when you forgot who was paying your bills." He didn't argue. His eyes welled slightly, but I didn't reach out. Letting go didn't require holding hands. "I mourned you years ago, Dad," I said. "This is just the ceremony." He nodded, stood, and walked out. Quiet. No goodbyes. The next morning, I printed and signed the last of the transfer paperwork. Full control of the house's mortgage, insurance, utilities, all now officially under my name. Then I emailed Malis and Dad a formal notice. All services would terminate within 10 days. Attached was an 8-year ledger, rent, medical bills, maintenance costs, plus interest and inflation. I didn't expect a thank you. But they'd know the number. I also contacted my former manager, asked about any openings. She replied within hours. There were remote consulting opportunities I might be perfect for. Dahlia offered me the guest room as long as needed. I accepted. When I packed, I kept it minimal. Laptop, passport, a few essentials, one black dress I had bought years ago but never had the courage to wear. It felt like armor now. I went for a walk to clear my head. Autumn had fully claimed Olympia, leaves like fire across sidewalks, the sky clear and wide above. By the time I returned, Dahlia was waiting with an envelope. "No return address," she said. It was handwritten, familiar loops and the slant of hesitation. Inside was a single sheet. "I didn't know how much I was taking until it was gone," it began. No preamble, no excuses. "If I apologized, would you believe I meant it?" I sat down slowly, stared at the letter, then looked out the window. I didn't know if I was ready to answer. But I knew I'd never be silent again. The morning light through Dahlia's kitchen window felt clearer than anything I'd seen in months. I stared at the screen of my phone, scrolling through the replies from my mass email the night before. Most were unread. A few were curt apologies. One cousin had written, "I believed her because it was easier than asking questions." It stuck with me more than any of the others. I tapped my fingers against the counter, letting the silence hold. The truth doesn't always free you. Sometimes it makes others face their cages. I opened a new document on my laptop. The title was simple: Total Financial Support Rendered, 2017-2024. It wasn't for revenge. It was for record. I needed to see it laid out. I needed the weight of it quantified. Mortgage, utilities, groceries, therapy co-pays, car payments. The new roof they installed the same summer I canceled my own vacation. The textbooks for Callista's last semester. Every Venmo request, every wire transfer, every line item with my name on the sender field. Screenshots of emails from Dad. "Can you spot us just until the end of the month? Your mom is overwhelmed. We could really use your help again. It's not forever." The total shocked even me. I attached it all to a legal notice addressed to both Malis and Marshall, CC'd to the family group chat. Subject line: "Since we're all talking numbers, let's not forget mine." It wasn't a threat. It was a ledger, and I didn't need a single response. By noon, the post had gone viral in a way I didn't intend. A family blogger picked up the story, someone who lived 2 towns over, who'd been at the Grateful Heart brunch and had filmed the entire presentation without permission. She titled the post, "Thanksgiving Implosion, When Truth Ruins the Toast." It spread like brush fire. Callista's sponsors backed out within hours. Her podcast episode disappeared from the guest list. A wellness brand she'd been endorsing issued a statement. "We stand with women who uplift, not erase." Malis's spa Yelp page exploded with 1-star reviews, many from people who weren't even in the state. The comments were brutal. I didn't read past the first three. That night, I got a voicemail. You destroyed everything, Malus hissed. For what? Pride? You always needed an audience, Elowen. You just couldn't stand not being the favorite. I listened once, then deleted it. They set the fire. I just opened the window. The next afternoon, Dad asked to meet. I agreed. We sat outside a coffee shop where people pretended not to recognize him, but I could tell some did. The man from the audio clip, the father who stayed silent. He was grayer than I remembered. His hands trembled slightly as he wrapped them around his coffee. You always had a superiority complex, he said, not even 5 minutes in. I smiled. No, I had accountability. You called it arrogance because it embarrassed you. He didn't argue. He stared at the table. I let her run the house because it was easier than defending you. Easier than telling the truth, I corrected. He nodded. I see that now. I mourned you years ago, Dad, I said. This meeting, it's just the ceremony. I stood and left without shaking his hand. The next week, I filed the final legal paperwork, separating the house deed from any family tie. My name, my terms. I also submitted a formal name change request for the mortgage holder, removing Marshall as co-signer, eliminating Malus's emergency contact status. Dahlia helped me pack what little I'd brought. Before sealing one final box, I labeled it Before. Inside, I placed old photos torn in half, not out of anger, but clarity, a record of what I'd let go. For the first time in a long while, I slept through the night. I started therapy again, this time for trauma resolution, not just survival. Every morning, I journaled for 20 minutes. Every afternoon, I applied to consulting jobs remotely. My old manager even reached out, asking if I'd be open to a long-term contract in the spring. Dahlia found me a small writing retreat up north, where I could spend a few weeks surrounded by trees and nothing else. I accepted. One afternoon, I pulled out a black dress I had bought years ago but never worn. It had sat in the back of my closet like a version of myself I wasn't ready to become. Now it fit just fine. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived at my new P.O. box. No return address. But I knew the handwriting. Marshall. I opened it slowly. Only one line inside. If silence was our bond, maybe honesty can be the key now. I folded the letter once, slid it into the before box without rereading. Some letters don't need to be read to teach you something. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I noticed wasn't the sunlight or the warmth of the blanket. It was the absence of a familiar ache. No dread pressed on my chest. No anticipation of another message, another blow, just breath and space and quiet. A quiet that didn't ask anything of me. I checked my phone. No missed calls, no new voicemails from family, no passive-aggressive emojis or urgent requests. Just a single text from Dahlia. Proud of you. I slipped on a sweater and stepped outside. Olympia's streets were slow that morning, like the town knew it wasn't in a rush to be anywhere. I walked without headphones, letting the shuffle of leaves beneath my boots and the distant chime of a bakery door fill the air. For the first time, silence wasn't punishment, it was power. Healing, I realized, doesn't scream, it hums. I used to think the volume of my suffering made it valid, but now, the quiet felt more honest than any fight I'd ever been forced into. Back at Dahlia's house, I sat at the dining table with a manila envelope in front of me. Inside, copies of every document I'd prepared. The final ones. One by one, I sorted through them. Account closures. Notices of transfer. The finalized removal of Malus and Marshall from every household utility, property access, and emergency contact form. No more bills paid in silence. No more subscriptions auto-renewing for people who saw me as a bank account with legs. I added one final note. You once said paying bills doesn't make me family. I agree. I walked to the post office without ceremony and slid the envelope into the drop box. The thunk of it landing was quieter than I expected, but it echoed somewhere deep inside me. Later that afternoon, I returned to the guest room with a cardboard box labeled Before. It had followed me through 6 moves. I never unpacked it, just carried it from one place to another like an emotional suitcase. Inside were photos, notes, drawings from childhood, A letter from Dad when I got my first job offer. A birthday card from Callista that said, "We're not sisters by blood, but we're bonded forever." I began sorting. Pictures where I was clearly an afterthought, cropped or shadowed, were torn in half and dropped into a pile. But the ones that held something real, me holding Mom's hand, a quiet smile from Dahlia, even a rare shot of Dad before the exhaustion set in, I kept. They weren't perfect, but they were true. At the bottom of the box was a folded note from my grandmother. I'd forgotten it existed. "You are the strong branch in this tree," she'd written, "and you may have to bend before you're seen." I whispered thank you, folded it again, and slipped it into my journal. That night, Dahlia and I sat on the porch, sipping wine as the sky folded into dusk. No candles, no playlist, just two women who had endured more than anyone ever saw. "We don't talk about legacy enough," she said. "Not the kind in wills, but the kind that passes down in silence." I looked at her. "You mean like emotional inheritance?" She nodded. "I stayed quiet for decades because I didn't want to lose my place." "I didn't lose mine," I said. "I finally chose it." We clinked glasses, not to revenge, but to peace. A peace I had fought tooth and nail for, not with fists or fire, but with words and records and the kind of clarity no one can argue with. It felt like a private ceremony. No one clapped, but my soul did. 3 days later, another letter arrived, Callista's handwriting. I recognized the loops instantly. This time it was longer, tearful, rambling, filled with phrases like, "I didn't mean for it to go that far," and, "You know I looked up to you, right?" I read it once, set it down. There was no anger left, just space. Space between who we were and who we kept pretending to be. I grabbed my pen and wrote back, "I hope you heal." "I'm doing the same, just not together." But I never sent it. I folded it quietly and placed it in the journal. Closure isn't owed, it's created. Later that evening, as I sat journaling at the window, my laptop pinged. A new email. Subject line, "Consulting opportunity, Seattle Tech Circle." I opened it. An old colleague had forwarded my resume to a women-led firm looking for experienced leads in cloud migration. They wanted to meet. I stared at the screen for a long time, then whispered to myself, "Full circle, but on my terms." I opened a fresh page in my journal, wrote in bold, "New chapter starts here." And beneath it, I didn't just walk away. I walked towards something better. The air inside the house felt thinner now, not from emptiness, but from clarity. I stepped across the hardwood floor, my steps no longer tentative. The house was silent, save for the faint echo of my own breath. It was legally mine now. Not a battle, not a negotiation, just a signature and truth that couldn't be revoked. I walked through each room, not to reminisce, but to reclaim. The dining room still bore the scratch from the night Malis had accused me of ruining Callista's engagement toast. The staircase, once a place I'd sit quietly during arguments, now simply creaked under my confidence. Flashbacks came like postcards, uninvited but brief. The shouted insults, the deflections, the way they used silence like a weapon and money like a muzzle. This house was built on my money and on their lies. Today, I reclaim both, I said aloud. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the new keys, and placed them on the counter. They were cut yesterday. No one else had copies. I would never again be surprised by someone else's footsteps on my floor. No one owns me here anymore, not even the memories. I sat at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. One last email. Subject, "This is not vengeance. This is release." Recipients, Malis, Marshall, Callista. CC, the extended family. Body, "This isn't about hurting you. It's about ending the version of me you benefited from. The one who paid silently, loved invisibly, and was treated as optional." Attached is the final breakdown. Financial contribution versus verbal recognition. Consider it a ledger of what I gave versus what I was told I never did. You no longer have access to this house, this name, or this version of me. I will never again pay to be unloved. Elowin. I hit send. There was no catharsis, just space. space that had always been mine. The next weekend, I hosted a housewarming, not for them, for the people who saw me before I had to shout. Dahlia came first, bringing her favorite rosemary crackers and a quiet hug. A few coworkers, a pair of distant cousins who had replied to my email with, "We saw you, we just didn't know how to help." In the backyard, we unveiled a small art piece I had commissioned. Home is who heals you. I toasted from the porch. This house used to silence me. Now it helps others speak. No phones, no posts, no curated captions, just the truth in its rawest, most unmarketable form. They didn't just lose a house, they lost the narrative. I opened the front door. For the first time, it was to let someone in, not to keep them out. That night, as the sky pulled stars over itself, Marshall appeared. He stood at the edge of the lawn like a man invited by memory, not by welcome. "I won't stay," he said. "Just wanted to see it one last time." "I didn't move," he continued. "I didn't see it before. What she did, what I didn't stop. I gave myself closure," I said. "This is just confirmation." I handed him a small box. Inside, the necklace he gave me when I turned 9. "It doesn't fit the woman I've become." He took it with trembling fingers. "Goodbye, Elowen." I nodded, but didn't say it back. The next morning, I walked into the county courthouse. The clerk asked, "Reason for name change?" "To end a legacy that never protected me." I signed the form. I dropped Blackmore with the weight of generations behind it. I chose my maternal grandmother's maiden name, a woman who wrote me letters when no one else did. A name with no scandals, no inheritance, no expectations, just freedom. It wasn't erasure. It was authorship. 6 months later, I stood at a tech conference in Seattle. My badge read, Elowen Miles. The speech was about reinvention. "You don't need permission to start over," I said into the mic. "Just a decision." In the back, a woman stood and clapped first. My old college professor. She smiled like she'd known I'd make it out eventually. Someone asked me afterward, "Would you ever reconnect with them?" I smiled. "They erased me once. I wrote myself back in, but not into their story.